agenda and take care of the minutes first. We have the minutes from the January 16th meeting. Are there any additions or corrections to those minutes as presented? Hearing none, the chair will entertain a motion to accept those minutes as presented. In motion second, any discussion? All in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. All opposed? The motion carried. I believe now we go right to discussion items, and the first one we have is the Medicaid forecast. And so I believe it's going to be passed around. Gentlemen, welcome, and the floor is yours whenever you're ready. Take your time.
Mr. Chairman and members of the committee, it's a pleasure to be with you today to present the April 2005 Medicaid forecast. My mother would be disappointed to know that I'd worn a hat inside that long. We have not succeeded, unfortunately, in making Medicaid boring again yet, but we will continue to persevere in our efforts to do that. Following this, Mr. Chairman, as I mentioned, we do have two ministerial third-party liability and CHIP core set attestation SPAs for your review and hopefully approval. If you were to flip to page 2, to the scope of the budget forecast, the items not reflected. The budget forecast reflects the current state and federal laws and regulations as well as current Indiana Medicaid policies. The forecast does not include proposed regulatory or statutory changes, including but not limited to proposed state Medicaid policy changes. For instance, we may eventually choose to make changes in the manner in which we cover ABA therapy, potential changes to the hospital assessment fee, the introduction of a managed care assessment fee, potential for the Healthy Indiana Plan redesign, including the introduction of work requirements, and any potential to limit prior authorization. If new regulations or policies affecting the Medicaid program are implemented at the state or federal level, they will be included in future forecasts. So we've decided today to start with humans because that is really what the Indiana Medicaid program is about. To review this page, which ultimately drives our cost structure. You'll notice a relatively rapid drop in the Healthy Indiana Plan from 2023 to the projected in 2027, from 791,000 to approximately 705,000. Over the course of the biennium, you see a very small increase at this point in time. Much of that is due to people unwinding from the public health emergency. The Hoosier Care Connect program, you'll notice a significant drop in the number of total Hoosier Care Connect recipients. That is because of the initiation of the Pathways program that you'll see located in the last box. And then Hoosier Healthwise. Hoosier Healthwise remains relatively similar. One of the things that caught my eye when I looked at this was pregnant women. How have we seen pregnant women decrease from 21,000 in 2023 to 12,188 projected in fiscal year 27. And the reason for that is during the public health emergency, we did not reclassify any individuals who were pregnant. So we had a candidly, we are overestimating and perhaps overpaying at that point in time for pregnant women. We believe the number of 12,000 to be about the right number. Fee-for-service forecast, again, you see some decrease in the fee-for-service program as they move to the managed care organizations in Pathways, and a relatively speaking small growth in the number of humans who are receiving fee-for-service in our state. I would, however, add that the fee-for-service population tends to be by far the most expensive population that we have. It is where our disabled and waiver children and adults reside. To look at enrollment over some period of time from the beginning of the PHE to the end, to April 27, if you drew a line from 1,500 to about the 2.1 million that you'd see there, you'd see it, that the difference is what was added because of the PHE, right? So it's a little lower than originally estimated. So we have data through January 2025 to look at here in terms of what our projections look like for the costs of those health plans. And with the exception of the Pathways program creating some anomalies in terms of the percentage of increases and decreases, the program continues to grow a bit more quickly than we would like. So let me focus on those things that we don't like. So let's look at the comparison to December 24 of Medicaid forecast. So here, in parentheses are good, not parentheses are bad. Let me call particular attention to number 4, which is the Pathways Year 1 risk corridor estimate of $51 million that we would expect to pay in 26, and another $51 million in 27. This is over and above the capitation rates that we are currently paying the plans. I'd be happy to answer questions at the end of this point in time. We will be changing our risk corridor policies for fiscal year 2026 and fiscal year and on a go-forward basis. Those will be reflected in future years. The other piece that is numbered, if you look at the federally qualified health centers updated projections, we discovered that we were not using the correct FMAP for many of those payments. And so by doing that, we lower the projection by using 90-10 money as opposed to 60, the regular match. Here is that plussed up. So areas of likely underestimation. Risk corridor payments. Well, I highlight those risk corridor payments because it's an awful lot of $300 million to 3 health plans is an awful lot of money to pay. It's understandable when you enter a new program that you're going to have a difficult time properly estimating rates. I came earlier today. Paul and I met with the plans, and we assured them that that needs to be a one-time anomaly for us. We can't continue to have $300 million of costs that we don't anticipate and that we're paying for in years in which the costs did not occur. It is not, candidly, it's not fair to you guys, it's not fair to the governor, it's not fair to the taxpayers. We have some degree of economic uncertainty that will be touched on when I'm finished. A recession and other economic downturns potentially influenced by recent tariffs could lead to higher Medicaid enrollment levels and increased costs. So I'm less concerned about higher enrollment levels because we have an awful lot of people enrolled in Medicaid today. It's a question of, and those who would be coming on would be in the expansion population and largely paid for by the hospital assessment fee. The concern I have here, though, on tariffs is the increased cost potentially to PPE and pharmaceuticals. As many of you recall from the public health emergency, the United States of America imports the lion's share of its PPE and many of its prescription drugs from overseas, tariffs may cause a increase in those costs. We will continue to examine and work to decrease the cost growth trajectory of attendant care, ABA therapy, pharmacy, and home health services, each of which have experienced high costs and utilization trends in recent years. This is particularly true in the pathways population, and one of the reasons we believe that we've seen that we see the risk corridor payment. So we are paying particular attention to that. We are uncertain on the cost of new programs and policy changes from the CCBHC programs, and the associated costs will be monitored as we consider whether or not to expand CCBHCs or not. And then rather surprisingly, a higher than expected Medicare fee schedule increase. Medicare received a 5% increase, 5.02% increase in Medicare Advantage earlier this month. That's more than I would have expected. Keeping that parity with rates may be difficult for us to do prospectively. Our final slide is the CHIP slide. We use the, as many of you who have been here for a while recognize that the CHIP program is budgeted separately, and it's relatively low cost, so I won't spend a lot of time on that today. I'd be happy to answer questions from members of the committee if you have them.
Thank you. Questions? Representative Porter?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Mr. Secretary, for being here. You had talked about how much more cuts you think went to the ABA and the attendant care. Can you be more, you talked about having cuts, can you be more specific about those potential cuts?
Well, we would refer to them as a reduction in services, but I suppose one could call them a cut.
Okay, reduction in services, cuts, how you want to frame it, it decreases, right?
The ABA, as you're probably aware, the previous administration had intended to have an ABA cliff starting on April 1st. When Governor Braun was presented with the ABA cliff, he concluded that that was not his plan. He did not wish to do that, and we have pulled back that state plan amendment and put forward a different one that provides a 3-year program. Today we are kicking off, coincidentally, Representative Porter, we are kicking off today our internal efforts to reform the way we are dealing with ABA, to really understand what services we are providing. There's unquestionable that there are more individuals who are currently have autism and other related disorders than there were 10 or 20 years ago. The Secretary Kennedy spoke eloquently about that yesterday. And the CDC, and you may have seen the CDC report that came out today that documented many of those issues. However, we cannot afford to continue to spend the amount of money we are spending on each individual child with ABA therapy. We need to get results. It's called therapy, and it does a marvelous job. But it is also occasionally, we have learned, been overutilized, and we need to figure out ways to limit that utilization so more individuals in need can receive it. In terms of the attendant care, we'll continue to monitor that and may look at decreasing the amount of care that individuals receive on a weekly basis. We are still in the process of developing those modifications.
Thank you.
Senator Cordova?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Secretary, for your presentation. Can you give us an update on the pathways waiver and the health and wellness waiver? I think last month I read that we reached capacity, and my recollection is that as of last month we had about 10,000 people that are still on the wait list. And finally, I think that from previous engagements with you and this committee, I've concluded that the decline rate hovered around 70%, meaning that out of those that you send them invitation, they either get placed in a different program, or they disqualify, or they decline. So if we have 10,000 individuals on the wait list between both, and since we reached capacity, what is the status on how to address that wait list, and how do we move forward?
It's an excellent question, Senator. And to your point, a surprisingly high percentage of individuals who are quote invited, close quote, off the wait list either do not qualify or choose not to receive those services. That number is somewhere, I believe, in the 60% number, not 70, but still much higher than I think any of us would have intuitively thought it might be. Well, one of the things that we have implemented today, or not today, we've implemented some time ago, is to go to 180 days. So your invitation is good for 180 days. If you don't qualify in that period of time, we recycle that waiver slot. In addition, you're correct. We are currently at capacity. The good news is that those as you know, those waiver slots reopen on July 1st of beginning of the next fiscal year. So we will have some. So we imagine that we will have some opening in May simply through the recycling, and then the reopening will occur in May.
If I may conclude with one more question, Mr. Chair. I appreciate that. So the slots will open again in July. We're at, I think, and then we're at capacity today. There could be some reshuffling of existing individuals based on where they funnel through the system. Session is going to be done in almost, today is the 16th, will be done 8 to 9 days from today. Unless we come back for a special session, does FSSA need an authorization to come back for budget augmentation in case you need to apply for CMS for additional slots? Because I understand July will be the timing for the new slots to open, but if the underlying problem of not having enough slots will not be resolved even when you open them in July, does that mean we have to wait until next session? Or what would the agency's plan be to address this?
Well, at some point in time, Senator, it's about money.
Correct.
And we won't spend money we don't have. So, and we're not in a position to ask the General Assembly to provide more money at this point in time. So I think that's where we are.
That's a fair, I think, from an agency, which is appropriate for the program. I appreciate your answers. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Representative Delaney?
Yes. Mr. Rowe, good to see you again. Did you indicate that there was in effect, a positive change under FQHC and item 9 on page 7?
I did.
And how did that come about, that suddenly we're going to be 55 and then 57 million better off than we were?
Okay. Sure. Good question. We were estimating that in the Medicaid forecast. We were estimating it using all of the state match at the regular level, right? Even though many of those individuals are paid for at the enhanced match rate. So what is good news for us and this is general fund appropriations, as you probably are aware, is candidly bad news for the hospitals, who will see an increase in the hospital assessment fee to pay the match to fund that projection.
That difference, okay.
Now, I would also add on the FQAC, on the federally qualified health centers, we will be examining federally qualified health centers in terms of how they are billing. We have some federally qualified health centers that are currently billing at 400 and 500% of Medicare, 500% of Medicare rates. That's probably a bit much.
Okay. Is there an actuarial issue in this? Was that an actuarial mistake that you made that resulted in 55 plus 57 million, or was that just you chose to use let's call it a low ball number?
I don't know the answer to that question.
So you weren't part of the decision as to what number to use that led to our finding?
I did ask the question whether or not we were using a enhanced FMAP to estimate the FQAC or not, and we were apparently not.
Okay, so that's an explanation. Whether that was a thoughtful decision or a mistake is something you don't know.
I don't know if it was intentional or unintentional.
Okay. And are you changing actuaries currently?
We have, the previous administration chose to let a RFP. That RFP was preliminarily awarded to Deloitte through a competitive bidding process. We are in negotiations with Deloitte today, and legal counsel advises me not to speak beyond that.
Well, I'll ask you a different question that maybe you can speak beyond. I've heard from what I think are responsible sources that when you were heading FSSA, that you had a regular monthly meeting where you went over actual results and estimations and corrected them. I also heard that that stopped sometime in the 2021-2022 era and did not restart. And some people think that that's one of the reasons we had the nearly $1 billion error. Am I well informed that you had such a program? I think you had a nickname for it that I won't repeat.
The monthly financial review and the quarterly financial review.
MF, right? Monthly financial, right? Okay. And
It's MF, the one that the MFF is the more
yeah. And so when did that disappear?
I can't speak to that. Paul perhaps would know.
You know, Paul?
Yeah, I mean, I think, I don't know the exact year, I think shortly after, actually Secretary Robe, probably a few years after that, we no longer did MFRs or QFRs. And since Secretary Robe has come back on, we started those up immediately on, his direction. So we have been doing those for several months now and putting those in place as we move forward.
Well, I want to congratulate you on that. I think that was a useful thing. Do the actuaries participate in those monthly meetings?
They are, I don't think they do really. No.
Are they informed of the?
Oh, yeah.
Okay.
In fact, so by the way, I'll put the thank you for the opportunity for the plug. On May 2nd, if you are curious, you can spend all day with me and Paul and the rest of the FSSA team reviewing the quarterly financial review by division.
There probably are some people who will watch. Now, help me to understand. Does FSSA have its own internal actuary?
We have one individual who is an actuary, yes.
And when was that hiring made?
And she is in the room, I believe. Kathy, I don't know. I can't speak to when she was.
Okay. And does the internal actuary coordinate with the external actuary?
That would be her primary job, one of her primary job descriptions, yes.
Okay. All right.
Where's Kathy?
She's right here.
Would you agree with that? Have I misspoke? Have I mischaracterized it?
Do I coordinate with them? Yes.
Okay, yeah. And I think this is very important because we can't have these mistakes again in this environment. And you're picking a great firm. Deloitte's a great firm, but it has very limited Medicaid experience compared to the one that's not going to be around anymore, Milliman. So it's a difficult transition. I encourage you to have your monthly meetings.
Oh, we will.
And I know you well enough to know that you won't be bored by them.
It's true, actually.
Sadly. I want to go to the numbers of people rather than dollars. I think
Humans on the program.
That's important, and
actually what matters.
that's on, I believe, page 3. And
Can you pull that up?
if I understand it correctly, you're expecting over just the next 2 years to lose about 90,000 people off the Healthy Indiana plan.
Well, if you look at SFY 2025,
Right.
which is we are currently in, we are projecting approximately 700,000 people in the program, and by 2027, we are projecting 2,005. We're at the 7,005.
Right.
So that's actually a small, relatively speaking, small increase.
Okay, that's the decline you think is relevant for those 2 years. The earlier thing was ballooned upwards by the health crisis, the public health crisis.
The PHE, again, as I pointed out, if you look at the pregnant women,
Right.
59,000 down to 38,000. 38,000 is probably the more accurate number.
I understand your statement on that. So if there is, you mentioned at the beginning some things that you don't know, such as whether we have a recession, whether we start paying a lot more for pharmaceuticals and PPE, as it's called. What's the scope of the risk? What's a bad number in terms of increasing our Medicaid costs over this estimate?
I don't know I don't have a good answer for you.
But
I mean,
it's potentially hundreds of millions of dollars, right?
I really can't speak to that, Representative. I don't have.
But what's the-
I have no visibility. If I had visibility into it, we would have made some kind of projection. But I don't have any.
Meaning that
visibility
it's so unclear what's going on at the national and perhaps the state level that you can't come up with a reasoned estimate as to the potential risk.
It's unclear to me at the national level what the risks are. I will tell you that I occasionally join Medicaid director meetings from other places, and they have spent literally hundreds and hundreds of thousands of dollars on actuaries running scenario after scenario after scenario. They have no idea what's going to happen in reconciliation. In the words of, it's just not knowable.
And one very specific question about what's not knowable. As I understand, an important part of our Medicaid funding is a thing called HAF, which is hospital assessment fees, am I right?
That is correct.
If that were canceled, forget all the other changes, all the other threats to foreign medicine being taxed and so forth, what would the impact of if we could not raise this hospital assessment fee?
We would lose the ability to match. We would lose our match that we use for the Healthy Indiana Plan.
And what's the rough amount of the match for the Healthy Indiana Plan?
No, I think we probably have a sheet that can give you a little bit more than a rough estimate.
Okay.
Funding. Well, if you flip to page, it's page 6, right?
6, yeah.
You flip to page 6, in the second big box, you'll see something that is called half funding. So, and we use that number to pull down that 90 cents for every one of those dollars.
So if we lost, and I see the range seems to be between 675 million a few years back to 900 million now, so call it roughly 900 million now. And so we get a 9-to-1 match on that?
Well, that's something of an anomaly. Yeah, below that, if you look, the HIP number is a bit lower than that.
It's about 475 or 575.
But your point is well taken, right? Which is if that is significantly limited or eliminated, we will have a very difficult situation.
What percentage of our revenue would be impacted, roughly?
Well, if you looked at the total revenue, again, in that slide, we're receiving about, we'll call it for the sake of this conversation,
right,
we'll call it $5 billion.
We would lose $5 billion.
No.
Okay.
No,
overall, we're getting 5.
Our total IGT, right, is roughly $5 billion, right, in 27, right? And so we would lose, if it were to go away completely, which I have not seen a credible projection from leadership that we have been in contact with that would happen. But if it were to, we would lose $618 million.
Okay.
But I don't view that as being in the realm of reasonable possibilities. I think so.
It is a considerable risk, but you'd think it wouldn't be 600 million is what I'm hearing.
Well, if it were to go away completely, that's the number,
Yeah.
right? I do not believe that is not one of the things that keeps me up at night.
Okay. Well,
Many other things.
yeah, I will not ask that open-ended question. All right, thank you very much.
Senator Cordova?
Thank you. I forgot to ask a question earlier. So you mentioned on, as far as potential statutory or regulatory changes that could impact the forecast, I was hopeful that you speak about the MCAF, the Managed Care Assessment Fee. Is my understanding correct that if this fee moves forward, which I know that in House Bill 1004, we had some of that language, is it true that that could generate potentially $1.4 billion a year, and that $1.4 billion is not baked in this forecast?
Okay, so if we were to maximize the MCAF, right, the estimate is approximately $1.4 billion, and that is that's the gross. The net is about $1 billion.
Because the 400, you have to use it to match.
Well, we have to figure out how to get it back to the plans,
Correct.
candidly, right?
Correct.
It is and again, you're asking me to provide, we're now in speculation mode, but it's not, it's following conversations with recently appointed members of the Trump administration. It is unlikely that they will easily allow us to go to that level. We will negotiate that over the course of if Senate Bill 104 were to pass, 1004 were to pass, and then we would begin negotiations immediately with the administration, and we would try and do that before the new regulations were to come out, because the new regulations are unlikely to be as kind to states as the current ones are. But we will be also guided by Governor Braun's belief that we don't have a sustainable federal
Partners?
government with the amount of debt that they currently have. So we'll be working with our federal partners who were kind enough to stop by yesterday, as you probably are aware.
So is it fair to say today that if there's a fiscal crisis, and if session is done, and if 1004 moves forward, that one of the possibilities is that the MCAF could be your rescue lifeline to help maintain the Indiana Medicaid program, because it would net $1 billion a year for 2 years, and that has not been included in the forecast. So that could be potential additional $2 billion. Is that a reasonable statement?
Unfortunately, I don't think it is.
Okay.
And I'll tell you why I don't think it is. The first reason is, while we will try to make it retroactive to July 1st of this calendar year or next fiscal year, the federal government may choose not to go along with our retroactivity. So that's just the reality. They may not, right?
Correct.
Secondly, they may find reasons not to approve an MCAF at that level, even though we have a B1, B2 test that gets us to that level. And thirdly, I don't know that the governor has concluded at what number he would be comfortable looking at. That number is probably not $1 billion.
So maybe a more reasonable statement to say is that we have the option of negotiating up to $1.4 billion annually for the MCAF, where we understand the $400 million have to be funneled back to the managed care entities, but we have a solution or an option that, depending on the governor's decision and depending on legislative action, we could have anywhere between 0 to 1 billion annually for 2 fiscal years to help with the Medicaid. Would that be a more reasonable statement?
There are a lot of ifs, ands, and buts there, and that's perfectly fine with me, so yes.
Correct. Well, I'll conclude by saying this. With the too many ifs, ands, and buts, that's why I think it is fair for you to make that statement. And I was trying to share the same concern with my colleagues through the budget process and through amending. I was a no vote yesterday. I think the only no vote on 1474, the agency bill, even though I supported it in committee, just to signal my concern that the agency bill did not have a plan. And you might argue that the agency bill maybe is not the place to include the solution. But my concern is that, again, in 9 days, session will be done. It's either, the options are very limited. The federal government already signaled that the potential cut to Medicaid is in the range of anywhere close to $880 billion. So the question is not whether or not they're going to look at Medicaid, is that there will be change. We don't know when. So wouldn't it be prudent that instead of waiting till January of next year to come up with a plan, that we come up with some kind of a measure to be able to only authorize FSSA to come back to this budget committee the same way we allow IEDC to do augmentation out of reserves that they might pay back? Wouldn't you be concerned as the leader of FSSA that session concludes, there's a fiscal crisis between end of session and January 1st of next year? Wouldn't you want that authorization, that authority to come back and seek an appropriation that was not done during this session to manage a program that serves 2 million people?
I'm comfortable with where 1004 is in the budget is at this point in time.
I think that means that
I would say that we would pursue the MCAF, we will pursue the MCAF as directed.
I appreciate it. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Representative Porter?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Secretary, just a quick question. With the emergency order by the governor yesterday in regards to SNAP, do we have a fiscal impact on that?
Fiscal, which executive order?
SNAP.
Well, there were two.
There are two? Well, both of them. Either. Whatever fits your pleasure.
I don't have an accurate fiscal at this point in time on it. We're still working with, we met with FNS this morning on the order regarding candy and soda pop. There's also a training piece there, so we've got to get further clarification from FNS.
Okay. Follow-up question. On slide 6, in regards to this 2025 shortfall on surplus, it was 220 million. Where are we going to get the rest of that money from? Is it going to be augmentation will occur there, or how will we get those dollars to address that shortfall for 2025?
Representative Porter, yes, we will be working with the state budget agency on potential augmentation of that. Well, we haven't worked through all the details and seen where that ends up landing at the end of the fiscal year, but at that point, we'll work with the budget agency about any potential augmentation or what's the best place to help fund that piece.
Okay, do we have a time you have a time frame for that?
No, I do not. I would assume it's going to be at the end of the fiscal year once we have final numbers. So that normally occurs in the first quarter after the end of the fiscal year when we'll have final numbers around that.
Okay, thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Senator Mishler?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So there's roughly 41 million in the Medicaid reserve. So is that a place that you could cover the first 2 years?
There's how much in the?
I believe 41 million in the Medicaid reserve fund.
41 million?
Yeah.
We'll spend that pretty quickly, I'm afraid. So
Well, I mean, I'm looking at 12 million, so.
what number, where are you?
So I
looking?
don't know. Well, he was asking about augmentation, but that is an option to
Yes,
use your Medicaid
that's
reserve
correct.
fund. I guess that's what I'm getting at.
Right, that's correct.
All right, thank you.
Senator Garten?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just to respond to Senator Kadora, so one thing to point out and remind everybody that in 1004, we've actually got trigger language in there. So we, the state, get a 28.5% administration fee off that, which is going to yield approximately 300 million, depending upon how you figure it. The trigger language we put in there basically says we would give that back to the hospitals to invest in the HOF and further leverage even more federal dollars if and when an MCAF is approved at the federal level, and what we would yield, the state again, would yield from that would at least be at least 300 million or above. That's when we would trade that off. So just a point of clarity. Yeah. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Any further questions? You want to have any closing remarks? Go ahead, please.
Thank you very much. It's wonderful to be back here. And I would be appreciative of your assent to the third-party liability at Station Spa and the chip core set at a Station Spa. I have a small write-up on this if you're not familiar with those. I'll happy to pass these out if you'd like. Pardon me.
Yeah, those items, I believe, are actually review items. We'll get to those, but yeah, thanks for, those are our review items for later, but that's okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, that'd be fine. You can go ahead and hand them out, that's fine. Yeah, they're the review items, yeah. Yeah. Yeah, those are review. I got one of those done. Yeah, they're big like. Yeah, that is it.
I gave away my last one. I did.
Yeah, we'll come back to those actually under the agenda items on the review, so thank you.
So I would be appreciative, I don't plan, if you want me to, I'll come back.
Yeah, because we haven't officially put the agenda on the table yet as far as the actual agenda at this point.
So,
Yeah.
so somebody text me if I need to come back,
Okay.
okay? Thank you.
Thank you. Next, I believe, if I'm not mistaken, we have the economic forecast. Yeah, I thought I did. We didn't put the agenda, we didn't put it on the table yet.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying.
Good afternoon and welcome, and whenever you're ready to start presenting, the floor is yours, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just here to give an update on the economic forecast for Indiana and, for the country while we're at it, to the extent that that impacts the state of Indiana. Is largely kind of an update, a follow-on from our discussion in December. So I'll be hitting some of those points probably again and updating with new information. But, we really still see, the U.S. economy growing, but at a slowing rate, which we already were kind of expecting, but the slowing rate is a bit lower now than it was in December. Not radically so, but, kind of what we call a growth recession, which is basically lower than kind of your potential GDP growth. And part of this, in terms of these growth rates, gets to even down to timing within the year, that at least early indicators of the first quarter were pretty weak in a few areas. Some of that may have been some front loading of imports, that kind of thing, in anticipation of potential tariffs, and that tends to pull that down. But we don't, wouldn't necessarily see that as a lasting effect, but that, kind of just from a statistical standpoint pulls things down. Just some of the factors contributing to the slowdown, just the ongoing effects of the Fed tightening that, I know goes back probably about 3 years now. But, to that extent, it's doing the job, trying to really keep things from getting overheated without, causing too big of a problem. There were some what we call tailwinds had been boosting growth. Some of that was coming out of the Inflation Reduction Act. Some of the new initiatives coming out of that were really spurring particularly some growth in a lot of manufacturing structures. So that gave a bit of a short-term boost to growth numbers that we didn't necessarily expect to continue. More recent factors, certainly the downturn in equity values, the NASDAQ, S&P 500, those is a more recent thing, and that can have an impact just in terms of, particularly in terms of consumer confidence, even though you could argue that it shouldn't necessarily have a direct impact on people's incomes and, spending in the short run. there's a wealth effect, from both home prices and, kind of the stock market of, it's more than just what's in your checking account or in your savings account that can have an impact on household spending decisions. And then, some of it is just potential fallout from some of the tariff announcements and just, trying to respond to, kind of where that's going, kind of what we know, where we see things going, and obviously that's a changing scenario, but to the extent that changes, some decision-making and the timing of some things happening. So what we look at then is, kind of a gradual rise in the unemployment rate, which is, we had been expecting that anyway, and we've raised that a bit higher. In terms of the Fed, I think there had been expectations that the Federal Reserve would start easing, and I'm talking about a few months ago now, really in the second half of the year, even especially by late year, really given the inflation targets that the Fed has, that those expectations have really gotten pushed off well into 2025 and 2026. So that hasn't changed too much. I think we've probably pushed back the Fed loosening a bit more from where we were. But we do have inflation eventually returning to 2%, as I'll show. We do have it, and we had this in the December forecast too, an expectation of some rising inflation that ends up being somewhat short-lived. So in terms of key policy assumptions, and again, this was as of probably April 7th, I think, we kind of just have to, on a certain date, we just have to kind of plant a stake in the ground and go from there. So those policy assumptions were the 25% tariffs on steel and aluminum, the tariffs on Canada and Mexico on many products, the non-USMCA compliant goods. At that time, the expectation for the tariffs on China were 60%. Those, are higher than that for now, but that's where we were at the time. And then for most other countries, that 10% universal tariff. So that's where we were when this forecast was put together. In terms of our fiscal assumptions for now are very much the way they've been. A lot of extension of some of the tax cuts that were due to expire, out of the 2017 Act. Some additional tax relief for overtime, tips, some of that were talked about during the election. And that's a big one where for now we haven't made kind of heroic assumptions beyond that in terms of what the budget reconciliation coming out of Congress will be. So there's a little bit of, I guess, what we call generic cuts for now, without getting into a lot of specifics that we just don't have a good rationale for, deviating too much from that. In terms of the federal layoffs, the level of that is quite a bit higher than what we were accounting for in December. And, a lot of that is based on things that have been announced. And then, we still have the issue of immigration, immigration inflows, and then even beyond issues of deportations and that kind of thing, just, a slowing rate of immigration, which ultimately, I think for our purposes, one of the big things there is the impact on the labor force. So then one of the big things then is what changed, and I really want to focus in a bit on what changed in the numbers between December when I was here and now. Some of the tariffs and counter tariffs are a bit higher than we were expecting at the time. That's been a fluid situation, And, there's some ongoing talks and negotiations going on, but just in general, it's been higher. And so at least in the short run, we would see that as being a bit of a drag on growth. A lot of the federal layoffs and spending cuts just a bit deeper and earlier than we were expecting. I think some of it we were expecting and had accounted for, but it's just moved a little quicker. So to the extent that kind of takes away from that line item in GDP growth, especially, has come out of the forecast. Stock market declines have been greater. I mean, we had really been anticipating a bit back in December, partly just because a lot of things really were going right for the stock market, at the end of the year. And so we figured, well, some of that, may not persist, but it's gone, a bit beyond that. Consumer spending has been weak in the first quarter, although, and this, I'll talk about data revisions more in a minute, but that's one where even, some data out today indicate that maybe things weren't quite as bad as initially indicated. But certainly, with consumer spending and the role that plays in the economy, that's certainly something that we're very mindful of. For Indiana, one thing I want to stress, is that we've had some data revisions. We are relying on data, from BLS, BEA, and others, and we get new data every quarter, and that also includes data revisions. And some of the revised data for the second half of 2024 came in lower than some of the earlier indications. And that also, kind of sets the starting point for the forecast, and so that gives us a bit of a lower starting point for the forecast. Don't see it as anything dire or drastic or anything like that, but it just, indicates a lower rate of growth coming into 2025. So again, you have a bit less momentum coming in. Wage growth has been a big one, really over the last few years. Has kind of come front and center as much as payroll growth, as how much are, for each job, how much are people making? And that one really has changed some over the last few years. And that was still actually strong, relatively strong, just not as much as a lot of the earlier numbers were pointing to. So really, I mentioned earlier, some of the fiscal policy assumptions. And so I think, hopefully some of the budget reconciliation process, will provide some clarity on some of the things moving ahead in terms of, solidifying the forecast. I have a few slides in there. As usual, I have no intention of going through them in great detail. A lot of these are just for reference in terms of some of the things that we're seeing. Again, just showing, really there for GDP growth in early 2025, just getting low, but then coming back, a bit closer to what we had been looking at by then. Real consumer spending still coming off those really high numbers in the post-pandemic period, but hanging in, around the same level as real disposable income. So again, a lot of these are just for reference, and just I apologize, but in the interest of time, I'll go through these pretty quickly. I'll point, and this is similar to a chart from last time, certainly the one on the CPI. I'll point out that gold line on the left-hand, in the left-hand graph. That one is inflation, core goods inflation. That's one that actually can turn negative and, can be kind of up and down. And that spike that we're seeing in there largely coincides with, the introduction of the tariffs taking hold, particularly, we time a lot of that in Q2 2025. So that's really driving that, and then really pushing up that level for a few quarters, just, as we increase import prices, and then ends up coming back down relatively quickly during the course of 2026. And again, that's, these are all still, growth rates on top of where you already are. I want to make that clear that we're talking about growth rates here. And then, really core services really remaining largely pretty sticky, and that's largely because of housing costs, housing and shelter costs being such a large component of CPI. That was one that was very difficult to get under control when it was going up, and now that it's coming back down, we expect it to, it's partly just a statistical thing that that just doesn't move very quickly, and so that tends to keep services CPI a bit more steady. Kind of the main point there. Again, showed this one last time. Again, I had to revise at least the starting point of the S&P 500 forecast, and we're seeing that risk premium working its way up, but really from some pretty low levels that we had, especially in 2024. So, still relatively benign on that standpoint, but certainly a lot of news to digest. Vehicle sales is one that I think I've shown every time that I've come for I don't know how long. But that's one that, and I apologize, I wanted to include what our forecast was last month, and I didn't get that in there. But that is a bit lower from our forecast that we have been running. And again, that's really pretty directly related to some of the tariff impacts and potential supply chain impacts and, pricing impacts, that kind of thing. We talked some about that in December. Still kind of a fluid situation, but, if you have import tariffs on intermediate goods, kind of inputs into your final goods, even if you're building something here, if you have to pay a tariff on some of those parts that you're putting into something that ultimately you're making here, that's going to increase the price as well. So that is reflected in the vehicle sales numbers. So this is one that I haven't really shown for a while. We run, we do this every month, just kind of as part of our forecasting. We run kind of a upside and downside things. What if things go a bit better than we thought they would? What if things, kind of fall a bit worse than our baseline scenario? Certainly recognizing, kind of the underlying uncertainties. So that shows kind of differentials. The blue line on the left there is the kind of our baseline real GDP growth, and then the red line would put us. That's kind of our pessimistic scenario, and that now would be pushing into modest recession territory. Not that unusual given kind of where our baseline is, but again, you see it's not sharply below zero and not a real protracted period of negative growth, but still in a recession scenario relative to our baseline. And then the unemployment rate, and again, I'll point out too that these kind of by their nature, the downside is always going to look worse than the upside looks good. Maybe that's not the best way to say it, but it's not really symmetrical, and that's just kind of, there's any time with this, there ends up being more downside potential than upside in how the numbers look, especially in the short run. So really these numbers are very much for reference. I don't, we can skip these for now in the interest of time. And get into, kind of more specific to the state of Indiana again. Some of the data updates just showed, a bit of a pullback in jobs growth from what we were expecting. Again, nothing dramatic. It was actually showing, sustained, fairly strong payroll growth, and that just slowed. It was still positive, just not as high a rate, and so that persists into 2025, as a starting point for our forecast. There's still plenty of activity going on, and still some good things can come out of that. In terms of tariffs, and I mentioned this before too, really tried to focus in on some of the big ones for the state of Indiana in terms of some of the major industries. Pharmaceuticals, that's an import that we don't think a lot about, and a lot of times that is ingredients. That can be ingredients, that's not just final product, and that can be a real big one. And then, of course, automotive, machinery, imports of parts for machinery, and then agriculture, both, exports more for that one. For some of the others, it's imports and exports, is a big issue. And then, in terms of where things could go and some of the policy objectives of those tariffs, certainly a lot of the idea of that is to try to bring, some manufacturing and other activity back to the country. You can certainly see some of that, and then there can be some balancing out of that of things that at least in the short run stop happening or get cut back. Because, with the import tariffs on intermediate goods, or then to the extent that there are some countervailing tariffs on exports that disrupt activity. And it's certainly, then the tariff on steel and aluminum, we've seen that one before, and just, the impact that we see on that, especially on the motor vehicle industry is the big one there. I've mentioned, and, again, even back to December, the limits on immigration and potential impacts on the labor force. I think at least from looking at the numbers that we have, the state of Indiana would be less exposed than many states would be, but there's still an impact, especially at the margin of, when you really are still, for some time now, we've been talking about being in a relatively full employment situation. Then your ability to continue to add jobs depends on your labor force growth. That there's just not a lot of place to, you need people in order to hire them, right? So we see that as a key factor. Again, it's a bit of a lesser issues, at least on a percentage basis in India than in other states, but still relatively significant with where you are. And especially certain industries, food manufacturing, construction, agriculture, are the big ones that stand out that would have difficulty maintaining a labor force. So again, when we talk about risks, the risks to the state economy mirror a lot of the issues going on nationally. Just some of the tariffs and policy uncertainty can tend to pull down growth. But then, if we get some resolution of some of the things and potentially some even positives come out of that, or I think sometimes even just a bit of a settling down after a period of uncertainty, can help things level out. So I won't get too much into the rest of these numbers. One thing that we're seeing all over the place is that really health and social services has been the big driver of job growth in most states. And to some extent, if you look at a lot of other states, health and social services is leading that race a lot more than it is in Indiana. Government has added jobs. At the other end of that, we have seen some general contraction in manufacturing jobs. But, we know in some cases that's a pullback from still kind of that post-pandemic push that we had, especially among automakers to rebuild inventories. That was largely expected, that we knew they had a lot of ground to make up. And at this point, they've kind of gotten back to a more normal inventory situation. We had kind of the boom in recreational vehicle production and sales there for a while post-pandemic that has, largely come back to normal now. But then in terms of comparisons with a year ago or 2 years ago, it's going to look weaker. Again, this is just kind of a, try to show some of the components of job gains and wage growth. So then when you look at kind of that total wage picture, which is ultimately what we're looking at, kind of what's really driving that. And we're back into a situation where, it's very much being driven by wage gains, rather than, growth in payroll job numbers. Again, you'll see that's not, we kind of reached had a bit of a shift in level there, kind of right into the pandemic that really has been kind of a lasting effect of kind of an overall higher rates of average annual wages. And a lot of that has been at the lower end of the wage spectrum to really, but, it's kind of a continuing factor. So then here's some of our top line indicators for Indiana. Again, really for payroll employment, this kind of takes us back to where we've been in some of the previous forecasts of, again, relatively low payroll employment growth. And then, so we get more reliant on wage growth. One thing I didn't talk much about is housing starts. Kind of left that out this time. The housing market, again, I think like a lot of others, kind of facing, an increasing cost scenario, but, with the relatively high prices, we see that as holding relatively steady, not a lot of upside potential, at least not a lasting effect. But, even with the higher interest rates, just that persistent demand for more housing, holding that in a relatively good, steady situation. But again, kind of when you're talking about U.S. GDP growth, kind of starting with a 1 or in the low 2s, then that, reflects back to the state economy as well. This one, I've been throwing in this table for years. I will point this out. This kind of I could have put it in earlier. It talks a bit about, gets at the issue of the data revisions. I highlighted a couple of numbers in red there. That kind of just shows what we thought we had, kind of in 2024 versus the new estimates. So those are largely show some of the effect of the data revisions from Department of Commerce. Again, it's nothing new. Data revisions are a common thing. They can be better. They can be worse. We try to do what we can to incorporate any early information that we think we have, but ultimately we take them as they come. This one happened to be, a bit negative for the state of Indiana. I don't see it as an alarm bell, or I can't think of a good reason for it. I don't know a good underlying economic reason for it other than, we've seen them before. And with that, sorry I rushed through that kind of quickly and anticipating there might be a few questions, but.
Representative Porter.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Mr. Jackson, for being here in the presentation. Could we look at, what caught my eye was many things, but this one in particular was page 8, the left hand, the real GDP growth baseline and alternatives. I'm trying to look for a little more transparency and clarity from my perspective. The baseline and the optimistic alternative and the pessimistic, what are those percentages? Do you know? I think I know, but want to make sure.
Yeah, for this forecast, the probability for the baseline was 50%. The probability for the pessimistic was 35%, and the that leaves 15% for the optimistic scenario. So they're not always evenly balanced.
Right.
Right. So, yeah, right now,
So, but you kind of, so the pessimistic alternative is 35%?
yes,
Okay, and the baseline is 50%, and the optimistic is 15%.
yes.
Duly noted. Thank you.
Further questions? Representative Delaney?
Thank you, Mr. Jackson. This is sort of a follow-up to Representative Porter's questions. What would you say the degree of uncertainty as to our projections and uncertainty as our future economy is compared to what we expected, let's say, last year?
Yeah, there's a higher level of uncertainty. Just largely driven by, federal policy. To some extent that's happens every time we get a new administration, especially, so that's partly where we are right now.
Yeah, that's part of it, but this is unusually high, the degree of uncertainty, isn't it?
Yeah, I'd say yes.
Yeah, and that will impact, of course, all of our efforts to forecast. And there's a direct correlation here, right? So one of the consequences of this uncertainty driven from Washington is that we're not so certain about our forecast, are we?
Right.
Right. Thank you. That's the good word. Thank you.
Well.
Right. All right. Thank you.
Senator Cordova?
Thank you. I have one question. Over the last few weeks, how much was wiped out of the equity markets in terms of the fluctuation because of the tariffs? And the reason I asked that question, because it impacts retirees in the state of Indiana, and subsequently it will impact consumer spending. So do you know what that dollar figure, whether for Indiana or on a national level, what was wiped out of the stock market, and how does it impact Indiana and consumer spending?
I don't know that number well enough to say. I vaguely recall something I read the other day, but that's not good enough for this forum.
Is it serious enough of a factor to be considered when we discuss consumer spending, especially with aging population in the state of Indiana? Would you consider that from an economic modeling perspective? Is that an important factor to consider? Or not just on retirees, but basically on consumer spending, regardless of the population that is investing?
It can be. I think as you allude, it depends on the type of investor, the type of investment, whether it's something that, can be readily liquidated or, like retirement funds in particular, there's less flexibility on that. So we do account for that, exactly how much of that plays a role relative to, say, more current income. I can't really, put a number to that, but we do consider that, and it does play a role.
My final question, given the level of uncertainty, have you seen other states across the nation come up with prevention strategies or some kind of proactive strategies such as for the state of Indiana, to manage proactively their finances based on the impact of the economy? Are you seeing changes in policies that other states are taking, given that the high level of uncertainty as it relates to, the tariffs and so on impacting revenues and consumer spending and other factors?
I don't keep a good enough eye on that to answer your question. I apologize. I just can't give an informed answer. And I think part of that is because most other states are, kind of doing exactly what Indiana's doing right now, that, even a month from now, a few weeks from now, you'd have a better answer. But I'm sorry, I can't give a good answer to that question.
Thank you. Further questions? Thank you for presenting.
Thank you.
I believe next we have the revenue forecast. Whenever you're ready, the floor is yours, of course.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. My name is Ben Tooley, and I'm the Director of Fiscal Policy for the House Republican Caucus. With me today is Hari Razafindramanana. Hari is the Chief Economist at the State Budget Agency. On behalf of the Revenue Forecast Technical Committee, Hari and I are here to present you with an updated revenue forecast for fiscal years 2025, 2026, and 2027. But before we dive into the numbers, I just want to say a few brief words about the Revenue Forecast Technical Committee, its members, and its staff. The charge of the Technical Committee is to select the revenue estimating models that are used for the revenue forecast. Those revenue estimating models are matched up with the economic variables projected by our economic forecasting consultant, who you just heard from, S&P Global Market Intelligence, to predict future general fund tax revenues. The Technical Committee is a 6-member bipartisan committee, and like the Budget Committee itself, is a collaborative effort between the legislative and the executive branches. Most importantly, the revenue forecast is a consensus forecast. So that means that all the members of the committee agree that what we present to you today is our best effort, given the uncertainty, it's our best effort at projecting the amount of general fund tax revenue that the state will collect over the next 3 fiscal years. Aside from Hari and myself, the other members of the committee are Dr. Dagny Falk, who is the committee's independent economist from the Miller College of Business at Ball State University, Eric Gonzalez, who's the fiscal analyst for the House Democrats, Krista Ricci, senior fiscal analyst for the Senate Republicans, and Hope Tribble, fiscal analyst for the Senate Democrats. Also want to give a special thank you to the staff of the Budget Agency and also LSA. They all play a very vital role in this process. They put in countless hours of work working on this forecast, and just want to give them the recognition they deserve. And then finally, usually say a few more words about this, but I do want to thank the Budget Committee for your continued support of the collaborative process by which Indiana estimates future tax revenues. I think it's a very good system, and I was just speaking with Director Ranney a few minutes ago, and he had spoken with some colleagues at NASBO, and he felt like Indiana might have one of the best processes out there. So just want to thank the Budget Committee for continuing to support that. So moving on to some additional slides, we're going to go to slide 3. This slide shows how revenues have performed through the first 9 months of fiscal year 2025 as compared to the estimates from the December 2024 revenue forecast, and also as compared to the same period in fiscal year 2024. Sales tax revenues are currently 1.1% below the fiscal year-to-date targets set in the December 2024 revenue forecast, but they are up 1.7% as compared to the same 9-month period in fiscal year 2024. Individual income taxes are currently trending 4.6% above the December 2024 forecast, but they're also 2.9% above the same period in fiscal year 2024. Corporate income tax revenues are currently 5.2% below target and 25.9% below the same period in fiscal year 24. And then finally, when you look at the total general fund revenues are currently 1.1% above the December 2024 forecast fiscal year-to-date target, but at the same time, they're only 1% above the same period in fiscal year 2024. Moving on to the models, slide 4 lays out the economic variables that feed into the revenue estimating models used by the committee to project the sales tax, the individual income tax, and the corporate income tax. The models used to estimate what we refer to as the big 3 taxes are identical to the models that were used in the December 2024 revenue forecast. In other words, just want to make sure the committee and all watching understand, the only meaningful difference between the models that we used for this April forecast and the models used in December of 2024 are the economic variables that were projected by S&P Global. So same models, pretty common practice for what we refer to often as the April update forecast. Moving on to slide 5, this gives you a high-level overview of the economic factors that are influencing general fund tax revenues. You have already heard the economic forecast. Tom did a great job. I don't want to rehash everything that he has already said, but I do want to highlight a few key points from S&P's economic outlook that are directly impacting the revenue forecast. First, though it may not feel like it here in a few minutes, S&P's April forecast is a growth forecast for the broader U.S. and Indiana economies. However, the growth projections for things like employment, wages, personal income are less optimistic than they were in December of 2024. And this is having the effect of tamping down revenue expectations. Second, S&P's economic forecast from last December, which of course provided the economic data used in the December 2024 revenue forecast, represented what, if you look at the last 6-7 month period, probably was a high watermark in terms of the expectation on the future economy. The April 2025 economic outlook is, in fact, we looked at these numbers for the process, it's more similar to what things looked like last fall than it is to what we used in December. I do say all this simply to highlight just how volatile the economic outlook can be in a relatively short period of time, especially when coupled with a dynamic federal policy environment. Okay, now on to the results. Slide 7 shows the new revenue projections for the sales tax, individual income tax, corporate income tax, and compares those projections to the prior year and the December 2024 forecast. I want to call your attention to a few key takeaways. First, you will see that the fiscal year 25 forecast for sales tax collections has decreased by $189 million as compared to the December forecast, and that the year-over-year growth rate for fiscal year 2025 is now estimated to be 1.7% as compared to fiscal year 2024. Sales tax revenues are currently $86 million behind the year-to-date target from the past forecast, and the new forecast projects that sales tax collections will, in fact, fall short of prior expectations. In the upcoming biennium, sales tax revenues are expected to continue to grow by 2.6% in fiscal year 2026 and 3.5% in fiscal year 2027. But of course, the way math works, those growth rates are from a lower base in fiscal year 2025 than we originally anticipated. Second, the forecast for the individual income tax has been decreased by $200 million in fiscal year 2025 as compared to December. Individual income taxes are now expected to grow at a year-over-year rate of 4.5% in fiscal year 2025, whereas the prior forecast predicted growth of 7%. It is important to acknowledge here that individual income taxes are currently trending 4.6% above December 2024 in terms of our revenue targets, but are only up 2.9% at this point in time as compared to fiscal year 2024. Of course, April is a very impactful month when it comes to individual income taxes, and we won't know the results of our collections for a few more weeks. So going back to individual income taxes, if you look out to the next biennium, we're actually projecting a decline of 1.8% in fiscal year 2026 and then another 2.6% decline in 2027. One of the major driving factors here is S&P's projection of future stock market returns and the negative impact that could have on estimated and final tax payments. Obviously, there's multiple pieces of our income tax. It's not just wages and salaries. It's also what people are paying on investment returns. Finally, the forecast for corporate income taxes has been reduced by $34 million in 2025, pretty much in line with current revenue trends. However, even with the reduction, corporate tax revenues are expected to grow by 7.3% in fiscal year 25 over fiscal year 24. Corporate taxes are expected to rebound strongly in fiscal year 26, but then decline again in fiscal year 27. Slide 8 shows the revenue projections for gaming taxes and what we call the other taxes revenue category, which is a number of miscellaneous tax receipts. Gaming tax revenues are expected to increase in fiscal year 2025, but essentially growth, if you can see from the numbers, growth is expected to grind to a halt in fiscal year 2026 and fiscal year 2027. course, there are outside factors, competition from Illinois. They've recently opened a new casino on the south side of Chicago. These kind of things continue to impact gaming revenue growth. In a typical year, we do not spend a lot of time talking about the miscellaneous revenue category, but interest revenues, which are part of this category, and are basically, it's the income we earn on the balance held in state accounts, definitely worth a quick discussion. As recently as fiscal year 2021, the state earned just $31 million in interest on state-held funds. In fiscal year 2024, that revenue number peaked at $572 million. The December forecast decreased the projections, and we decreased them again in April 2025, just based on expectations of what lower, long-term interest rates might have, what the effect it may have on the state. Overall, total forecasted tax revenues are expected to grow 2.7% in fiscal year 2025 as compared to fiscal year 24, by just 0.8% in fiscal year 26 as compared to 25, and creep up only 0.1% in fiscal year 2027 as compared to fiscal year 2026. While the forecast does in fact project continued revenue growth, today's forecast does represent a net decrease of nearly $2.4 billion, with a B, billion dollars in projected tax revenue over fiscal year 2025, fiscal year 2026, and fiscal year 2027 when compared to the December revenue forecast. This amount equates to about a 3.4% decrease in available tax revenue over the next 3 fiscal years covered in this forecast, and a decrease of about 4.2%, or roughly $2 billion in available tax revenue for the 2 fiscal years of the upcoming biennium. And then last but not least, this is slide 9. It's our combined statement, which is a great resource, but you'll need to put on your reading glasses if you want to read it on the screen. The remainder of the slide packet contains appendices with charts showing the revenue trends, the trends in the economic variables that are incorporated into the revenue models, and various other data points. For those watching online, this presentation, the economic forecast presentation, and all the supporting documentation are available on the Budget Agency website. And that is all we have for you today. We are happy to take questions if you have them.
Thank you. Any questions? Senator Cordero?
Thank you for your presentation, Ben, and I appreciate you, and I was hopeful for better news today. Going back at the corporate taxes, what are the factors that are leading to the significant drop in corporate taxes? Even currently, when I look at the decline in individual income tax, actually, if you look at slide 3 specifically, individual income tax is growing in fiscal year 2025. Corporate tax is decreased by 5.2, followed by 25.9%. Is there an underlying condition that is impacting this decline?
I'm actually going to let Hari answer that question. He's our technical expert and probably would like to say a few words.
Appreciate it.
Sure. A few different aspects going on here. So we track the Indiana gross state product as a ratio of the U.S. GDP. That has been revised downward. So what that means is usually you have your large corporations that may operate beyond the limits of Indiana, but through the apportionment factor, some of that revenue being allocated to Indiana, but also Indiana is a different tax base than obviously the U.S., so we wanted to take that into consideration. Obviously, with S&P's assumptions regarding trade, transportation, and so forth, the revision that S&P has made since December is impacting this forecast. And then also the downward revisions in the S&P 500 are also impacting this to the extent that corporations expect a different flow of profits, but there are also a factor with regards to tax planning, because we've noticed that through years that overperform, which we have seen since 2020, revenue may seem high, but as you know, they may carry forward these balances, overpayments and so forth, and you may see higher refunds when the economy slows down. So the combination of those factors lead to board projections.
This is extremely helpful, and I appreciate the explanation. Do we conclude by your first explanation that most of the decline is by large corporations that extend their business beyond the boundaries of Indiana? So would it be fair to say that that decline is mainly caused by larger corporations? We're not talking about small businesses in Indiana that only operate in Indiana, based on your first explanation. Would that be reasonable to say that?
So the first variable that impacts the model the most is the S&P 500. So I would first look at the S&P 500 downward revision to see how the projections in calendar year 25 and 26 are particularly impacting the biennium. And then secondly, I would look at how Indiana's tax base, which is more exposed to trade transportation, has been now more impacted since December than other sectors. So, if you think about small, medium-sized businesses may operate obviously across different sectors.
Correct.
Our tax base for corporate is more exposed to manufacturing and trade and transportation.
And I assume that the supply and demand issue is impacted by the tariffs and the global, supply chain issues. Would it be also reasonable to say that for these corporations or these businesses, is there any correlation with the number of employment or the employees in the state of Indiana? Are you noticing anything specific as demands on services or goods, and how is that impacting employment? Are they laying off people? And then the second piece is that when you mentioned the S&P, I know that, are you referring to realized or unrealized gains and losses that are impacting their revenues? Because I assume if they're not liquidating, then that is going to only impact the unrealized gain is going to be on paper, unless they are taking the investments, liquidating them, reinvesting back in goods and products, and hiring employees. If you can elaborate just a little bit more on that.
The first part of your question, employment forecast, as Tom Jackson just highlighted, has been revised downwards, still growing, looking at near 0% growth. So employment is impacting wages and salaries, which impacts personal income, which essentially, this downward revision to forecast about 3.4%. Actually reflects the downward revision in the wages and salaries forecast. So, as you highlighted very well, there's multiple factors there. But as to the S&P 500, it's two factors. Well, two dimensions here. One, in terms of the sentiment, because sentiment affects investments, and it affects all these factors.
Consumer spending.
So whether it's realized or unrealized, it will affect. But then there's always, obviously, capital gains. So what we track in our models is a measure that has actually been very consistent with our income tax base. And so we track basically realized gains, but it has another dimension to it, which is if the market falls, it will also affect tax planning. It will also affect, behavior across.
Absolutely. Investors' perception, and then the consumer confidence and the ability to put your capital in businesses. If the economy is shrinking, why would you be investing? And that's when we see investors pulling back or out of the market during these times. My final question, looking at the forecast, so we're projecting a decline of almost $1 billion in each fiscal year in 2026 and fiscal year 2027. I think your presentation is only limited to just sharing the forecast with us, and probably maybe the better question would be for us as a committee to discuss the response to that and how would the state be. So I will reserve that question maybe for later committee discussion if that will be the will of the chairs of the committee. But I appreciate it. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Further, Representative Delaney?
Well, let me start with the biggest question. Any suggestions to where we find $2.4 billion that we expected and no longer expect? And I'm dead serious. Where would you find that?
I'm going to refer back to Senator Kadora on that one and his response. I think that's not the role of the Revenue Forecast Committee to answer that question. If I was, I didn't bring my hat with me today, but if I did, I would have, be changing hats on and off here in my various roles. But for right now, I'm just speaking on behalf of the committee, and that's for the policymakers to decide.
What percentage of a decline is that in the expectation overall?
I think I gave that number earlier. I believe it was, if you look at the 3 years as a whole,
Right.
it's about a 3.4% reduction if you just add up those 3 years in total.
So the last 3 months of this fiscal year,
Well, it'd be the entire,
plus the next two.
entire fiscal year 25,
25 plus-
26, and 27. Now,
Okay.
if you're just looking at
Right.
the upcoming biennium, it's about I think I said 4.2% reduction in overall revenue if you just add the revenue numbers together.
All right, that's helpful. Unlike your prior answer, which was expected but not particularly helpful. Okay. Is this consumer confidence issue, does this affect your estimate at all, the lack of consumer confidence?
So leading to April data, the sentiment has obviously fluctuated, but as Tom mentioned, we have received Q1 2025 data that was different from data in Q1 of 2024 and data at the end of 2024. So obviously that does not, it's not a black or white type of answer. However, it does show that the sentiment improved through December and the sentiment, deteriorated through April. And so it just happens that April is when we do the forecast, and that's what.
Consumer sentiment is based in part upon actual experiences of people, not just what they're looking forward, but what they're experiencing. Is that fair? All right, and let's talk about subgroups of the population. What's the effect on retirees in particular of consumer sentiment in this context?
So we don't track that in particular, so I wouldn't be able to.
All right, and I assume you also don't compare the reaction of homeowners who are concerned about property tax. That's part of the consumer sentiment too, isn't it?
So what I can tell you to help give you some perspective, home prices, home sales, which are part of our models, are expected to rise. Household net worth is expected to rise. So to the extent that you have a wealth effect that is actually driving a lot of what you're seeing right now, which is 1.5% growth in sales tax, 1.7 this year, 2.6 and 3.5, which is actually back towards the historical trend of what you expect. And so what that means is you've had those last 5 years where you went through a pandemic, you've had the rebalancing, and now the economy is kind of going forward with people having more money, it's just less than expected than in December.
That's an interesting psychological position. I got more than I had, but less than I expected. On the page that you have, page 19, which talks about wage disbursements and home sales, okay? What does this tell us about wage growth? What's going to happen to wage growth in this state?
Absolutely. So first of all, heading into this forecast, we tracked a couple of things. One is employment. The second one piece is average annual wage.
Right.
Employment has been revised down. Average annual wage has actually remained about the same. So what this tells you is perhaps in terms of the labor pressures on the labor markets, those are still stable. However, when you look at in terms of the job losses relative to the job gains, that has been seen downward. So as you know, different industries have higher different wages than others. And so while employment is lower than expected, the wage rate, which is I think about 4 to 5%, that is still pretty steady, which as Tom Jackson mentioned, you have a lot of the healthcare services, type related jobs that drive a lot of this. And so it's important to dissociate between the employment and the average annual wage, which is how much one person is getting paid, on average.
So we will not expect any job growth, meaning employment level growth, is that right?
So there's growth, it's just near 0%.
Near zero job growth, okay. All right, and you don't estimate inflation, I take it?
There is inflation in our forecast. It's just right now it's expected to rise slightly in 2025 temporarily, but then come back within the Fed funds target.
So at least on a temporary basis, we'd have what might be called stagflation. We're not going to have a lot of increase in jobs, but we're going to have a stable, if unpleasant, level of inflation.
I wouldn't put a term on it, but I would say that what you're looking at is a lot of coming back to a historical trend. And so what that looks like in the short term is below trend growth.
So what you're saying is the good times have rolled.
Yes.
All right.
I mean, relative to 10% growth in sales tax in 2022, yes.
Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you. Any further questions? Seeing none, let's stand in recess for 15 minutes, and let's plan to reconvene at 25 after. So we'll stand in recess for 15 minutes. Thank you. Go ahead and call the meeting back to order. And I think we're now ready for review items and the projects. And there's been a proposed agenda that's been placed on the table. Are there any amendments to that proposed agenda? Hearing none, the proposed agenda is placed on the table for discussion. And I believe the first item that we have today is the Indiana State Police. I'm not mistaken. Gentlemen, welcome and thank you for your service, and the floor is yours.
Is Mitch Roop coming back?
I think somebody else is going to do it, I think, for him.
Hit your button on that black box.
There, all right. Thank you. My name is Michael Wiley. Thank you, Mr. Chairman and the committee. Thank you for your time today. We are here to request additional funding to complete a project that has already been started. We're near the completion of our new Evansville lab. We're just asking for a few additional dollars.
Thank you. Any questions? Okay, thank you for being here. Appreciate that.
Thank you.
Next, I believe we have Indiana University, I'm not mistaken. Welcome.
Oh, you haven't left us yet. You're still here.
I'm still here. I'm not sure I wanted to be here earlier, but thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the Budget Committee. My name is Tom Morrison, Vice President for Capital Planning at Indiana University. Like I said, glad to be with you again. Have two projects for you to consider today on behalf of IU. The first one is to be located here on our Indianapolis campus. It is the IU Lab, standing for Launch Accelerator and Biosciences Building. It is to be built in the 16 Tech District, and it is exactly as the name describes. It is a lab building focused on the biosciences and in everything from education to basic research to incubation to innovation and transfer of that knowledge to private industry and to develop those partnerships that want to exist within that building. It is a key part of the economic development role of a major research university, but at the same time, very important to the state of Indiana and to the local economy here in Indianapolis. Total size of the project is 150,000 square feet. Cost will be $172 million. It is funded by a $138 million grant from the Lilly Endowment. We're very grateful for our partnership with the Lilly Endowment, and this is the largest grant in the history of Indiana University. In addition, there'll be $34 million of IU research funds that will be committed to the project, mainly for the purchase of scientific equipment that would outfit a building like this. And with that, I'd be happy to answer any questions you might have.
Thank you. Any questions? Representative Delaney?
Yeah. Will these facilities be used to carry out federal grants?
Yes, possibly.
So that's kind of a risk factor here, isn't there?
It is in terms of anything in the research enterprise at the current time.
At the present time, okay. And how long will it take to construct this facility?
About 20 months. Right. So we anticipate breaking ground before the end of this calendar year. And so if you thought about that, be open late in 2027.
Okay, thank you, sir.
Further questions? Continue, please.
Thank you. Second project is related to the IU School of Medicine, also here in Indianapolis. It is the laboratory build-out of two facilities. One being new space that is connected to the new IU Medical Research and Instruction Building being built adjacent to the new IU Health Hospital at 16th and Capitol. If you look in that direction, there's no way you can miss that series of projects. And so our new 10-story building is now complete. This will build out a portion of the basement of that building for research infrastructure that will service not only this building, but also the neurosciences lab building that's immediately next door through an underground connector. It'll have core facilities, core research facilities, and when I say core facilities, that means shared equipment space that multiple researchers can utilize as opposed to having to purchase and install similar research equipment in every single different lab. And so that is the first one. The second part of the project is renovation of the basement level of the Van Nuys building on the research campus adjacent to Riley Hospital, to give you some bearing. And this will be build out or renovation of space that will allow us to capture more space for research and research lab infrastructure at that location. Total cost is $20.5 million for the two projects combined, 24,000 square feet between the two buildings build out. Be happy to answer any questions that you might have.
Thank you. Representative Mishler, or Senator Mishler, I apologize.
There was a Representative Mishler at one time.
That's true.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I know, Dr. Morrison, this is your last time in front of us as you're moving on to be a Duke Blue Devil.
Yep.
And I first met you when I was going through my internship in 2004 when you were at Ball State.
Yep.
And you were very helpful as I navigated through this process. And you were always a great resource for me. So I want to say thank you and good luck.
Thank you, Senator Mishler. Thank you to the entire committee. I was thinking earlier today that I think I've appeared before this committee well over 100 times in my time between Indiana University and Ball State University. It's been my pleasure. This committee, in a bipartisan way over the years, shows a great degree of leadership, and it is because of that that the higher education system, the public higher education system in Indiana is very strong. So thank you, and thank you for your comments.
Thank you, Senator Mishler. I actually beat you. I have known longer than you. I went Ball State there back, I think, in the previous decade, probably, or century, yeah, probably.
That is true.
A long time ago. Right? Long time ago. Said that wrong. But thank you for your service. Representative Porter.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Well, it doesn't matter how long you've known each other, but it's how important the time that we spent together.
Yes.
So over the years, me being here for a while, I got to know you, appreciate you from the education perspective to now the budget process, and you know, work with Jim Morrison, you in particular, and other people. It's been truly a joy. Your commitment and your volunteerism throughout the state of Indiana, not only with Indiana Sports Corp, but other organizations, shows your true character of being very inclusive when it comes to working throughout the state. And our loss is definitely that other place gain. I don't want, you know, I'm not a fan of that school, but because you're there, I'll open it up just a crack to say, okay, it's all right. But we really appreciate you. I appreciate you personally from all the conversations we've had, to you refereeing basketball games and all the things that you do and your volunteerism and your compassion. And if you say something, I believe that over the years, you have never given me any time to pause when something came out of your mouth. And that's sincere. And thank you very much.
Thank you, Representative Porter. That means a lot. Thank you. Appreciate your friendship.
Thank you.
Is a check in the mail?
Thank you. Thank you again. And I believe next we have Purdue. Welcome, and when you're ready, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Good afternoon, Mr. Chair, members of the committee. My name is Kendra Leatherman. I'm Director of Government Relations for Purdue University. We have two projects on today's agenda for your consideration. The lease on Lux project is for an adjustment and extension to our current lease. Presently, we have a lease with Scion Group for the Lux apartment building on Capitol Avenue, and we're requesting to expand the term and expand the scope of the current lease. After approval, the lease would extend through the 26-27 academic year, officially ending on July 31st, 2027. The new lease commitment will allow us to control the entire building, providing 196 apartments or 672 beds for student housing with 374 parking spaces. Total commitments just over $16.8 million for the 2 years, funded by auxiliary housing and dining funds. As you are likely aware, we're seeing an increase in enrollment in our Purdue Indianapolis campus and an increase in demand for residential housing. Specifically for fall 24, we had 760 new beginner students at Purdue and Indianapolis, and we expect the demand for this campus to continue to grow as we continue to bring the full scale of Purdue University to Indianapolis.
Any questions? Continue, please.
Our second project for consideration is also a housing project, but for our Purdue Northwest campus in Hammond. We are requesting approval to build a new residence hall on that campus. The project is a 42,000 square foot project that will include 150 beds geared toward freshmen and lower division students. The total project cost is $29 million, funded by non-fee replace debt, auxiliary housing dining funds. On the financing end, we're issuing new revenue bonds, refinancing old bonds, and using $9 million in reserves to help facilitate that process. Our housing demand at Northwest has increased 15% since 2019, and there has been a wait list at Northwest since 2022, and we've recently converted 64 single rooms to double occupancy rooms to lower that wait list, but it still has one. Not only are we seeing an increase in demand for housing, but also an increase in general enrollment at our Northwest campus. Fall enrollment for 24 was up 1,700 students, which is an increase of 4% from the previous academic year. For those of you that are also familiar with our Northwest campus, this residence will be north of 173rd Street, which means it's closer to the heart of campus, and our students won't have to cross that large thoroughfare to go to their classes.
Thank you. Any questions? Thank you for presenting. And I believe next we have review items. I believe we have Family and Social Services. They're on their way, so just hold till they get here, all we can do. Welcome, the floor is yours.
I apologize.
No problem.
From that standpoint. So thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. My name is Paul Bowling, the CFO for FSSA, and I'm here to bring you two state plan amendments. These are both amendments for attestations to the CMS to provide CMS some attestations. They do not change any policies or procedures we do today, and they have no fiscal impact. The first SBA amendment is an attestation that relates to TPL and ensures we have statutes in place that align with the Consolidated Act of 2022. The Act increased our flexibility around our TPL and assurance that states have laws in place bearing responsible TPL from refusing payments for an item or services solely because of prior authorization. The provision also clarified that third-party insurers must respond to state inquiries within 60 days. The TPL language was incorporated into Senate Bill 486 and aligns Indiana with the provisions that CMS is requiring us to do an attestation for. This change would be effective July 1 of 2025.
Thank you. Any questions? Continue on with the other
All right.
Please.
The second amendment is another attestation, which the state is required to submit to CMS related to our CHIP program. CMS passed the final rule back in August of 2023 that requires states, starting in federal fiscal year 2024, to report child core set and behavioral health measures on adult core information. We have worked with a vendor over the last years so that we're able to pull the information needed for this reports. This change would be effective June 1st of 2025.
Thank you. Any questions on that? Thank you for presenting.
Thank you.
Well, members of committee, as you know, we have a proposed agenda that's been put on the table. Are there any motion to remove any items from the proposed agenda? Hearing none, is there a motion to approve the agenda as presented? Moved and seconded. Any discussion? All in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed? Carries unanimous. With that, I believe that wraps up what we have to do. I know members of committee will have a June meeting, and I'll try to get that set here, once session's over, so you can start planning your schedule around that. Again, thank you for all your work, and with that, we stand adjourned.